The emergency room was as chaotic as ever. Dr. Arman had grown used to the rush of patients, the beeping of machines, and the constant movement. It was a normal day until a nurse entered his office with urgency in her eyes. "Doctor, room 10. A child. She's in critical condition. You need to come now." Without a word, Dr. Arman grabbed his file and rushed toward the room, knowing the gravity of the situation. As he entered, his eyes immediately fell on the young girl lying in the bed. Her pale skin, shallow breath, and lifeless gaze told him everything he needed to know. She was in grave danger. Beside her, a woman stood, her face filled with worry. Her clothes were worn, her hair disheveled, but there was a sense of determination in her eyes. "Who is she?" Dr. Arman asked sharply, trying to keep the situation under control. "What happened?" The woman looked up, her voice trembling as she spoke. I'm not her mother," she whispered. "I found her on the streets. She was so small, alone. I couldn't leave her. I took her in, but I don't have the resources. I've been doing my best, but I don't know what else to do." Dr. Arman's expression softened for a moment. Despite her desperation, the situation had gone unnoticed for too long. The girl was suffering because of it. Without wasting any more time, he turned to the nurses. "Start the fluids. Run all the necessary tests. We need to stabilize her. Fast." As the medical team went into action, Dr. Arman stepped out to review the girl's file. The name, blood type, and birth date stared back at him, and something about it felt strangely familiar. It wasn't possible. Could it be? His heart skipped a beat. He pushed the thought aside, telling himself it was just a coincidence. But deep down, something was stirring. He called for DNA testing. The results had to confirm it. He had to know. He had to be sure. Minutes passed in tense silence. When the nurse returned, her expression told him everything before she even spoke. "Dr. Arman, the DNA results are a match. It's positive." His mind went blank. Positive. It couldn't be. But it was. His legs moved without thought, carrying him back to the room. When he entered, the woman was still standing by the bed, unaware of the revelation. His eyes were fixed on the girl, her fragile form lying there, unaware of the storm about to hit her life. He knelt beside her, gently brushing the hair from her face. As if sensing his presence, she stirred, opening her eyes slowly. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but when they finally met his, a flicker of recognition passed between them. She was weak, but something in her expression told him she was fighting to understand. "What's your name?" Dr. Arman asked softly, his voice barely a whisper. "Zeynep," she murmured, her voice frail. His heart stopped. Zeynep. The name he thought he would never say again. The name he had whispered to himself in the dark nights when the pain of losing her became too much to bear. He could barely speak. "I'm your father," he finally managed, his voice breaking. The girl blinked, confusion clouding her face. She couldn't possibly remember him, not after all these years. But for Dr. Arman, the moment felt surreal. He had spent years mourning her loss, and now here she was, in front of him. Slowly, with the slightest hesitation, Zeynep reached up, her small hand weakly lifting toward him. Dr. Arman's heart raced as he took her hand gently in his. Tears filled his eyes, but he couldn't speak. For the first time in years, he felt whole again. "I never gave up on you," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I never stopped looking for you, and now I've found you." The woman standing behind him was still, watching the scene unfold, unsure of what was happening. She had no idea who Dr. Arman was, but in that moment, it didn't matter. He had found his daughter. After all these years, after all the pain, they were reunited. Dr. Armand pulled back slightly, looking at Zeynep with wonder in his eyes. "We're going to be all right, I promise." The room felt like it had changed in an instant. All the pain, the uncertainty, the years of searching melted away in that single moment. As he held his daughter, the man who had once lost everything found something that was more precious than life itself: a second chance.